I had no reason to complain about my life. At 30 years old, I seemed to have it all. My job wasn't just a source of steady income. It gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment. My two-bedroom apartment in the city center was cozy, a sanctuary after long workdays. My parents, still young and energetic, were a constant source of support. My father and I would occasionally go fishing, and my mother could still bake pies that filled the house with the comforting smell of my childhood. My social circle was vast, filled with acquaintances and colleagues. But a few close friends stood out, the ones with whom I could share anything, from life's biggest questions to fleeting everyday thoughts. Still, despite this seemingly perfect setup, one thing was missing: love. I longed for a partner, a woman who would not only share my dreams but also help me build a future together. I wasn't desperate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life wasn't truly complete without someone to love. And then one spring evening, everything changed. That was the night I met Olesia. We met in the most unassuming way, in a small cozy cafe tucked away from the bustling streets of the city. It wasn't a fancy restaurant where people spent more time snapping photos of their food than eating it. No, this cafe was a hidden gem, the kind of place where strangers exchanged nods of familiarity and the air carried the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. I had stumbled in after a long day at work, seeking solace in a strong espresso to revive my energy. As I waited for my drink, I noticed her at a nearby table. She sat alone, engrossed in a book, her posture relaxed but elegant. There was an air of quiet confidence about her that caught my attention. Her chestnut brown hair fell loosely over her shoulders, framing a face that was striking in its natural beauty. When the barista handed me my coffee, my hand brushed against hers as she reached for a napkin. We exchanged polite smiles and I moved to a nearby table, stealing glances at her while pretending to check my phone. "Good book?" I found myself asking, breaking the silence. She looked up, startled, but quickly smiled. "It is, though I can't decide if I like the main character or hate him." I laughed, sensing an opportunity to keep the conversation going. "Sounds intriguing. Should I be adding it to my list?" Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Only if you like unpredictable twists. Do you?" That simple question led to a 2-hour conversation. We talked about books, music, and even modern art, something I'd never been particularly passionate about until that moment. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound fascinating. Her name was Olesia. She was ambitious, grounded, and had a laugh that was both infectious and genuine. By the time we said our goodbyes, I knew I wanted to see her again. Our connection deepened quickly. Olesia lived in a modest rented apartment and worked for a well-known company in the city. She exuded professionalism and determination, qualities that only made her more attractive to me. We discovered we had countless things in common. We both loved the same music, adored classic films, and had an unexpected passion for modern art. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to every text, every phone call, and every moment we could spend together. But there was one oddity about her. She was fiercely private. Olesia wasn't on any social media platforms, which was unusual for someone her age. She didn't take photos with her phone, and she avoided being in pictures herself. At first, I found it refreshing, her focus on real experiences rather than curating an online image. But over time, her insistence on privacy began to feel peculiar. "Why don't you want me to post our photos?" I asked one evening as we strolled through a park after dinner. She hesitated before answering. "I just prefer to keep my personal life private," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't press her. Everyone had their quirks, and hers seemed harmless enough. Our relationship was nearly perfect, Except for one thing, we never spent weekends together. Family obligations, she explained early on. My parents live far away and they're not in great health. My father can barely walk, and my mother has been bedridden for years. Her weekends were always the same. She packed a bag on Friday evening and caught a bus to a small town 400 kilometers away. There she spent 2 days shopping for groceries, cleaning the house, cooking meals, and doing laundry for her parents. It's exhausting, she admitted one evening, but they need me. They can't manage on their own. I admired her dedication. Let me drive you, I offered. It'll be more comfortable than the bus, and I'd love to help out. Her response was immediate and firm. No, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. It's not a pretty sight. I wouldn't want you to see them like that. I couldn't argue with her logic, but something about her reaction felt off. I brushed the thought aside, convinced that her reluctance stemmed from a mix of pride and embarrassment. As the months passed, I began thinking about the future. Living together, starting a family. These were no longer distant dreams but tangible possibilities. Yet Olesia's weekend trips were a looming issue. How would we balance a life together with her constant absence? I've been thinking, I told her one evening. We could hire a caregiver for your parents. That way you wouldn't have to travel so much, and we could visit them together once or twice a month. She nodded thoughtfully, but her expression remained unreadable. Maybe, she said finally. Let me think about it. She glanced over at me as she spoke. Her eyes were clear and bright as a keep. Despite the challenges, I was ready to take the next step. I loved her, and I believed in our future. What I didn't know was that Olesia had been keeping a secret that would shatter everything we'd built together. Sobian. It was late May when I decided to surprise Olesia with something special. Work had been draining for both of us, and I thought a short vacation might be exactly what we needed, to reconnect and spend uninterrupted time together. One evening, as we walked home from dinner, she mentioned that her boss had denied her request for vacation in August, pushing it to late June and early July. She seemed frustrated, but resigned. Do you have any plans for June? I asked casually. No, nothing specific, she replied. Her words set my plan into motion. I rearranged my work schedule and began searching for the perfect getaway. After a few calls to travel agencies, I found a week-long trip that seemed ideal. A coastal retreat with a beautiful hotel, guided excursions, and just enough downtime to relax. All that was left was to finalize the booking, which required her passport details. Knowing her reluctance to share anything openly, I decided to be discreet. That Friday evening, I invited Olesia out to dinner at a charming little restaurant near her apartment. Over wine and dessert, I pretended to feel unwell. I think I might have caught something, I said, feigning a groggy voice. Would it be okay if I stayed at your place tonight? I don't think I'll make it home. She agreed, concerned but unsuspecting. Once she fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to her handbag, which she'd left by the sofa. My hands trembled as I rummaged through it, finally finding her passport. Sitting at the kitchen table, I flipped it open. At first, everything looked ordinary. Her name, date of birth, and photograph were exactly as I knew them. But then I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, on one of the pages, was a stamp with a man's name and the word marriage. My Olesia was married. I stared at the page in disbelief, my mind racing. If she was divorced, surely there would be another stamp indicating it, but there was nothing. Just one single entry, dated 7 years ago. I turned the pages, unable to stop myself. And then I found another entry, a note about a 6-year-old boy. Nozozu, in the case of great distress, experience the following symptoms. the feelings of death-like calmness, ghost-like reflections, calm sleep. My head spun. The small town she visited every weekend wasn't home to a pair of ailing parents. It was where her husband and child lived. I put the passport back exactly where I'd found it, grabbed my coat, and left the apartment. The early morning streets of the city were quiet as I walked aimlessly, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. How had I been so blind? I replayed every moment we'd shared, every excuse she'd made, every red flag I'd ignored. I had trusted her completely. I had loved her. And now, I was left questioning everything. The most painful thought wasn't even about me. It was about her husband. What kind of life was he living? Raising their child while his wife spent her weekdays in the city with another man? And what about their son? Did he understand why his mother was gone so often? The betrayal felt overwhelming, but the anger in my chest burned hotter than the pain. By the time I reached home, I had a plan. Sitting at my computer, I searched for her husband's social media profile. His name had been stamped in her passport, and it didn't take long to find him. The photos on his profile confirmed everything. There he was, smiling with a little boy who looked unmistakably like Olesya. They appeared happy, oblivious to the double life she was leading. My hands shook as I typed him a message. I kept it brief, explaining who I was and what I'd learned. At first, his response was dismissive, accusing me of trying to cause trouble. But when I sent him a photo of Olesya and me together, his tone changed. "Call me," he wrote, followed by his phone number. When I called Dmitry, his voice was tense and disbelieving. I could hear the mix of anger and heartbreak in every word. "I can't believe this," he said after I'd explained everything. "She told me she was working for our future, that her job in the city would give us a better life. She told me she was caring for her sick parents," I replied bitterly. "She lied to both of us." Dmitry sighed heavily. "I thought something was off. She started spending less time at home, and when she was here, she seemed distant. But I never imagined this." He told me about their life together. They'd been married for 7 years, and their son, a bright and curious 6-year-old, adored his mother. Olesya had recently been promoted and transferred to the city. The plan was for her to settle in, secure her position, and then bring the family to join her. "She was supposed to come back for us," he said, his voice breaking. "Instead, she built a new life without us." We ended the call with an unspoken understanding. Both of us had been betrayed. Just half an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Olesya. "What the hell did you tell my husband?" she screamed, her voice sharp with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stayed calm, though her anger was like a knife in my chest. "I told him the truth," I said evenly. "You've been lying to both of us for months. He deserved to know." "You've ruined everything," she shouted. "My life, my family, everything." "No, Olesya," I replied quietly. "You did that. Now leave me alone." I hung up, blocking her number, and sat in silence. I'll never know what happened to Olesya and her family. Did Dmitry forgive her for the sake of their son? Or did he walk away, unwilling to continue living a lie? As for me, I've started to rebuild. Trust is harder now, but I remind myself that not everyone is Olesya. Somewhere out there, I'll find someone who values honesty, someone who understands that love built on lies isn't love at all. Until then, I'll carry this lesson with me. Loving too isn't just dangerous, it destroys everything.